let's go through just kind of what is mastery in the first place. So mastery by this definition, and I'm having a little bit of trouble with this Zoom software right now, so bear with me. Okay. Number one is sort of excellence, trying to get to a very high degree of proficiency in a particular subject matter. And, maybe that's not a goal of yours, and that's fine if it's not, but for some people it is a goal. Obviously there's Olympic athletes out there, striving to become really the optimal thing in a kind of competitive framework. There's many competitive universities, there's many startups trying to be unicorns, and people who are really trying to become, the best that they possibly can in a particular instrument or whatever kind of thing that you've taken on. And, not necessarily everyone, achieves that absolute highest bar, but, there's a decent number of people out there attaining, and, sometimes people who manage to attain in multiple fields, which is kind of one interesting thing. And as you can see, I've sort of been involved in several different fields myself. One sort of other thing from a kind of definitional standpoint is just an absence of bullshit. So I think that's something when people associate, and this is something, for instance, when we teach the courses that I do in our training program on sort of crypto mastery, and that kind of goes into the technology of cryptocurrencies, it goes on to how to trade cryptocurrencies, it goes on to some general information, that we're not mixing in information that doesn't have accuracy. It's not actually true. It's not kind of overhyped. It's just kind of the facts of what it is, and actually being able to work around the facts, and also be someone that other people, when they come to you, can know they're going to get a factual account. So that's a very kind of important element in it all. The one that I would say almost could be reduced as an actual definition is harmony. Harmony is, kind of a musical idea in some ways as well. But the more that you can absorb it into the rest of your life, you can find that things have, dynamic proportions. It's actually a very Pythagorean idea. If you, study the history of philosophy, which has influenced so many different things. And in some ways before even we had formal mathematics, we had some interesting people wandering around talking about, divine ratios of, music and sound and things of that nature. And I've already mentioned accuracy. I mean, not everyone, as you're probably some people know baseball or cricket or whatever else, not everyone is always batting 100%. Even, some of the greatest, thinkers themselves. I was reading a book by Timothy Leary this weekend, and he said, it's actually great if I just get a third of my ideas are correct, but they're really bold, interesting ideas that are going to influence people. So accuracy isn't important necessarily in every single field all the time. But, when we're talking about mastery, it is an important thing to say that you're actually coming out and delivering consistently at a very high quality. It's probably worth saying that in addition to the human language stuff that I've done a lot of, I've also been a kind of competitive programmer. I was in the company that actually acquired Topcoder. I was sort of the top coder there for a while. So, I'm kind of pretty well versed in the sort of competitive dynamics around a lot of these things, and what it takes to kind of succeed and kind of be at the top of the game. So here's some tools. So just cutting into it. Number one, copy people. That's just like the most obvious thing. It's amazing how many people try and like recreate the wheel from scratch without realizing that there's like 1,000 people out there have done it better for you. And particularly if you look back like centuries or something like that, like there are some just awesome people out there. Like what was Isaac Newton doing? How did he get to be like, inventing so many things? Like study their lives, figure out where the kind of features that were there, and then maybe you remove some things in your life that seem less important. And my particular thing recently, I was studying Isaac Asimov, who wrote 500 books during his life, and he's maybe most famous for science fiction, but he also wrote like textbooks on every major sort of field of science, and had just a really wealth of interesting kind of things that he did. Realizing that's a real thing that people have attained. It's you just have to not make room for other things in your life if that's the kind of thing you want to do. Another thing that illustrates copy is this little infographic I just put here. It's not actually made a poster so I can put up on my wall to look at it, but it's from Naval, who maybe is the most famous angel investor right now. I was actually chatting with him yesterday, I think, just about these concepts, and he basically said, what you want to do is create things that are creating positive internalities and removing negative externalities. So like, what are the things in your life that are actually producing a kind of exponential positive impact? Keep doing them, do more of them, make sure you make time for those things. In this case, he says fast, lift, sprint, stretch, and meditate. Build, sell, and write. Create, invest, and own. Read, reflect, love, seek truth, and ignore society. So it is a little bit looking at, hey, maybe not everything out in society that's there trying to get your attention on Facebook or whatever else is actually going to be beneficial to you. That probably isn't a surprise, but you sometimes have to meditate on that fact because they're going to come in and try to grab your attention and steal it. And then say no to everything else. Avoid debt, ruin, addiction, disgrace, shortcuts, and media. So, and some of these things really have a toxic effect on the brain. They're like, drugs that basically want you to come back and they get you excited and you get like really angry, and but then you want to go back and feel that same sensation again, and then it can all be all over for you. So you'll be sucked into some vortex of hatred and never really accomplish anything. So that's really unfortunate. I don't know if I need to let people in. Hopefully someone else is in. Okay. I'll look at the chat, I guess, in a little bit when I'm done this first bit. Okay. So, and then he says, relax, so this is amazing and victory is assured. Hey, it's not all about hustle all the time. It's also about kind of balance. And that's why I said harmony, bringing the things that are into your life that are aligned. One other person that I like to copy is Tony Robbins, because Tony Robbins talks about having your energy be aligned, with your thing. And that if you're vibrating, imagine your spinal cord like a string, like a violin, and it's vibrating at a certain frequency. If that's a really good frequency, it's actually going to draw other things in your life that are vibrating at this sort of high quality frequency, in even a dynamic, non-local kind of way. Maybe some of you are here because you're vibrating at a frequency where you want to internalize some of these things. So that's, an amazing thing to do. So always basically look for things that you can do that are out there already that don't force you to recreate it. Body awareness is one of the key things that I think is emphasized in every major tradition. And I could have said fitness, and it includes fitness, but why I say body awareness is when we have our minds very different, often become not in sync with reality. It's basically the truth. We get idea in our internalized hype. We start thinking we're better at something than we actually are. And really what we need is a check-in mechanism that shows us. And, for instance, if I'm waking up every morning, I think I'm Superman. I think I've accumulated some, supernatural powers and blah, blah, blah. But then I can find out and I go to do, say, 20 push-ups and I find that I can actually only do one, then I realize, that there are physical limitations, the reality of the, material constraints that are there. And that is a check-in mechanism to put me in a state of what is the reality versus, what fantasy world I might have somehow embraced. And I think the deeper you go and the more things you do, the easier in some ways it is to get in weird, states of disconnect or for that matter, just not prioritize things that you should be. And Naval says this too, with the relaxed stillness, the kind of ability to, this is the kind of other thing about retrospectives and finding a way to kind of come back and process, is you're really always in a space to process all the input that you're taking in. And you're going to be generating everyone is in every instant, including right now, tons of data. I'm throwing lots of words at you, you're interpreting them, you're deciding, whether or not they're important. You need to find places that, you're going to be able to take all that signal and really come back and figure out what is important. So having regular reflection and stillness is critical. Another really thing is intention. So, if you're out there just to be great for the sake of being great, that may be a good intention. If you're kind of have a competitive edge or whatever it is there, but just to be honest with yourself about what it is and kind of check in what's kind of motivating you and finding a way to kind of going in and no motivating. And accountability. Now, accountability is actually an interesting one because many things when you're doing athletics or something, or even college, university, it's in some ways like a team sport. I mean, it may not be framed that way always, but you're within a context of other people that are out there. They're doing roughly the same thing as you. You're taking exams at the same time. There's kind of like a socially reinforcing aspect to all of those things that sometimes you don't get in more solitary ventures. Like if I'm sitting down to write a book, I might not automatically get someone that's going to make sure I'm going to finish all my chapters on time and finish all the formatting and some of those longer form, potentially more difficult things. So you really, in the tools here, it's kind of like a mindset, but you can put it into concrete terms. What is the accountability mechanism that is going to force that? And I'm going to give some of the ones that I use in all of these categories to make it more specific. So some things that I use that are like, I'm very, very strict about, and you know, I've copied lots of people, right? So I whenever find a master, I have a database, I'll show you bits of it, that shows me some of the people that I'm very deliberately going out to copy their behaviors. And just general discipline is an important one for that. And having a reflection, again, I'm like, you know, going on about Naval because I just made this poster about him. But, you know, he says he does an hour of meditation every morning. Doing meditation every day for me has been something I'm super strict about as a kind of platform for, you know, my own kind of behavior. And right now we package things, and some other people and I are involved with this in these sort of 6-week delivery cycles where you write down at the beginning every 6 weeks, here are the things I'm going to accomplish during the 6 weeks. And then you do a kind of check-in session at the end of those 6 weeks. And again, may not be as important for you if you're in a more communal environment thing, you're working for a startup, whatever else. But the more you start to unpackage that and have more distinct strands in your life that you are the main driving force for, you kind of have to like own the process yourself. And one of the things that's always really important about that is the kind of quantified side. So like, is there something that you can check in and basically go in and say, how well am I actually doing this? And that's the thing that we, you know, and for instance, if you go to like a lot of standard personal trainers, they will never do this for you. They'll just kind of give you a feel good metric of like, oh, you look like you did a good job today, or you sweat, or you're like, went from being like really not fit to being like kind of borderline fit, you know? And that's not going to take you to excellence. That's like not the mentality. You really need things that are going to basically be incremental, ideally exponential, where you're kind of growing bit by bit and kind of tracking those things. And again, I'll try to show you some of these things. And just an important thing, and this is really related to your own brain chemistry, is rewards. Like when you do this, and it's actually kind of an interesting, like even like subconscious thing, when you reward yourself for accomplishing something that was difficult, then your whole body and sort of mentality will get into, wow, I can achieve difficult things, and I'm going to get rewarded. I'm going to work harder to make sure those things happen. You know, graduating and finishing a diploma, other things like that can be in that category. But if you can like work that way into your, you know, overall thing, lifestyle in a way, you're basically going to gear your whole thing to actually go out and do things that other people would think are difficult or unattainable, and are, you know, going to become second nature for you basically, and embedded in your sort of psychology. So let's like look in briefly into a couple of these things. Again, I may have to struggle with Zoom. So, looks like it's sharing, so feel free to chime in if you don't see what I'm seeing. So I have basically a bunch of different metrics that I use. This is sort of in the 6-week cycle. And I'll scroll down here too, because this goes into my daily routine, which changes a little bit. I have some variety, but like I said, meditation is the key. What I do is I meditate for 22 minutes every morning, and I track. I don't use a stopwatch, but I track the time, and then when I stop, I see how far I am from the 22 minutes. So it's a way of me basically gearing into a high degree of precision in my own self-internal clock, so that I'm not dependent again on the clocks of external society. I use this sort of talasana, which is a yogic technique in which you go in full lotus and hold yourself up with your hands. I do a number of handstand push-ups every morning. And I do Agni Sara, which is something similar to breath of fire. It's actually similar to Wim Hof breathing, but with more muscle contraction in the lower abdomen. And it's an ancient yogic cleansing technique that also kind of takes you into deep kind of like pranayama clearing state. For all of these, I count them. So basically for Agni Sara, I count the number of repetitions that I do. People often say that when you do Agni Sara, for instance, you take a full exhale and then you do these kind of repetitions. Around 40 counts, you start to get Kundalini type effects. So those are, really interesting techniques, especially to build them into your thing, but they're also meant to be clearing and kind of resetting techniques. I also play a game of minute speed chess, which, is a very attention focusing thing to try to play a game of chess in a minute, especially against AI or a skilled opponent. And a very challenging one. You can see here, I only won 1 out of 30 times when playing against the computer in this cycle. So those are some of the things that are kind of part of my daily routine. And every morning I'm making a little note of what I've sort of achieved. I wouldn't recommend that anyone just go out from scratch and, create something this comprehensive and this detailed, because you're likely to, basically find it like really cool at first and then really hard to follow. But picking a couple things, with a kind of accountability framework, such as we have here, and then building it into a kind of routine that that you can do. So, even if you're starting at 0 meditation, saying I want to meditate once or twice per week, and then you can make sure you're doing that and maybe even do more than that, and then you'll feel good about your achievement rather than setting a goal that is too high and then kind of coming short. Similar to kind of like fitness metrics and how I track them. Again, these are all kind of systems I developed myself from scratch, partially because, through these principles. And what you'll see is I have these different scores in different categories. Some are easy to kind of understand. This burpee one is basically the number of burpees I can do in per minute over a certain time frame. So I, typically do 150 burpee sets, and I look to do around 14 burpees per minute, which is close to the sort of world record for that time. I also built this sort of aerial ninja sort of trading gym that I keep track all my times for, and then I do it for various types of yogic score training things, which I'll pull up here. So as you can see, like this is how I break it down, and these are looking basically at all the different kind of subcomponents of scores. So we have the Wim Hof time, which is basically how long you can hold your breath, the kind of plank, how long you can hold plank, push-ups, how many consecutive push-ups you can do, how many consecutive pull-ups, chair dips, squat jumps. And basically, once every, say, 6 weeks, you go out and see, how many of these things can you do repeatedly without failure. And then I track it, and then all these numbers are normalized to 1, and then basically that produces a composite score. So when I started, the composite score was 7. Then it dropped off a little bit. I think I was traveling during that time. And then more recently, I've been more consistent, and you can see this has gone quite up a lot. So my time that I can hold my breath is about doubled. My number of push-ups has gone up, and all these different things have kind of gone there. Similar thing with yoga. I mean, again, a lot of people aren't really looking for mastery in yoga, and no one is saying necessarily you should go out and look for mastery in yoga. Feel free to just do some vinyasa classes and be happy, But in this case, I'm looking at how long can I do a handstand? How long can I do the full lotus with this sort of hands? How long can I hold the wheel? How long can I hold crow? How long can I do forearm stand? I'm also tracking these over time. And, I'm not doing yoga every day. I am doing a couple yoga classes a week, but when I am, kind of deliberate about it, and I'm also deliberate about pushing my edge, finding how well I can do a particular activity and seeing if I can do it just a little bit better. And, the more I do that in more different categories, the before it effectively becomes a sort of exponential process. So one other thing I'll share, and then I'll sort of open it up for questions, is the overall kind of tracking system that I have. So this is basically on a year-long basis. Every year I set an intention, and then this year is actually a little more comprehensive, but I track all the different projects I have going on. So, and I state basically what I'm trying to do in these different projects. So one sort of challenging thing in basically doing art, I produce Oracle decks, I produce events, I have, this sort of funds, hedge funds that I kind of help out with. And I run an online book publishing system. It's very easy to kind of get sidetracked by different projects and juggle, and then none of them really successful. So being very systematic in how you approach it and making sure you put the time across is an important, element in kind of doing that. So I track that pretty systematically. I have these other kind of fitness tracking things, and I basically write down my goals, and then every once in a while I check in to see how well I'm doing them. Of which these goals of that were here in the end. I also write every, I'm a kind of bookworm, so every book that I buy, like this past quarter, I bought about, I think, 200 books. Actually, no, like 125 or something like that, and I probably maybe read like 30 or something. So yeah, and I basically track it and hold it all kind of in this document, and so to see, how well I've done. And this is similar, I don't know, for people familiar with OKR system. Google uses an interesting tracking system that's been used in other organizations for tracking internal employees and setting your own goals and encouraging people to do that, which I highly recommend. I've also worked in kind of the management consulting of applying that to organizations, and I think it's great. And one of the things that they say in that thing is it's actually good to strive for a lot of things and, and accomplish some smaller subset of them than to strive for things that are really easy to obtain and get all of them. Because you're not really progressing if you just put a bunch of things that are easy. Like if your list of things that you're going to attain is I'm going to wake up every morning, and then you got 100%, like you haven't really done anything. So, in these cases, sometimes I set very ambitious goals. And in this case, for instance, I got like 74%. I don't consider that to be a particularly bad thing. It's just the way that, I do it. But so that's really, the overall progress of kind of how I've built the system. I do occasionally let other people join in or provide context for other people. I also am personally teaching and facilitating other people who have a mastery level in a particular subject area, and I produce online video education so that they can teach people that subject matter. So if any of you feel like you have a high degree of mastery in a particular subject area and would, enjoy being on the teaching side, very happy to, have a conversation about that as well. So that's all the formal kind of content I have, and maybe I'll stop sharing for at least a minute and see if anyone wants to talk about anything. So questions, ideas? Looks like there's a chat. See, oh, so Indy has a question. How does one deal with something extraordinary happening that throws you off the 6-week cycle? So I had this in this past 6-week cycle because COVID happened, and I was like, oh my goodness, I was planning to raise money for this project and do this thing and whatever else, and then I couldn't go, and I couldn't even drive 4 hours to including seeing some friends in LA that I was planning to do things with. So that is inevitable in life. It's going to kind of throw you some, weird curveballs and stuff like that. And there's no ironclad solution. One is that, you have multiple things that you can do at any time. So you're not entirely dependent on like one person, or one thing. This was a big mistake I made earlier on in some of my business ventures, is that I was really dependent on like one person to do something, and that person got bored or distracted or had something better to do or whatever else, and then the whole thing collapsed, and I was like putting all my energy into it, and that was very sad and unfortunate. So these days, either I control it all myself so that I know that I'm the sole person doing it and everyone is directly responding to me, or I like highly validate any partners that I work with in advance of actually agreeing to do anything with them, so that there's no, real possibility that something that I put a high degree of effort into would fall flat. But that's sort of something I've learned over time. Is there a way to master things without so much structure? I think it's almost the opposite. Like the structure, I think a lot of great, like for instance, musicians are sort of, not necessarily totally self-taught, but they put so much energy into it that it just sort of consumes their life, so that it's a natural thing for them to just spend every waking hour kind of working on a particular thing. And a lot of authors I know that are quite successful are in a similar category, like Philip K. Dick, if you know that author. They just were totally immersed in what they were doing. And I think that really that kind of act of kind of falling in love with something to the point where you just have no desire to do anything else is really the best way to get there in a particular subject area. I think that the disciplines around it are important for particularly when you're in the management and other things like that too. But you could really just be an amazing, science fiction author, for example, by just having an idea and falling in love with it so much that you just drop everything and immerse yourself totally in that world. And in some ways, that's the best form. But let's see. You can't not do it. Exactly. That's exactly the spirit. Any questions from? We have some local people here. Oh, what are the things you cannot not do? For me personally, I feel always drawn to push my own edge, and learning, I think, is something I find thing. I also find morality as like a really fascinating and compelling subject. I really love studying Confucius when I was younger. I'm actually probably going to go back and like memorize some sayings of Confucius and stuff like that. And not necessarily morality as like abstract principle, but as like a lived reality, like this traditional idea of like virtue and something that you internalize that has a force associated with it. And I think many of us live in systems that are basically governed by markets, governments that are run by merchants. And that has a sort of way of basically creating the opposite dynamic, where every single thing, including your morality, becomes a commodity that is bought and sold. And I would say that, I find the opposite framework way more compelling, where people are very deliberately cultivating different types of virtue.
How do you manage your energy? How do you find energy to keep doing all the things that you want to keep doing?
Question from local. How do you find energy to do all the things that you want to do? I guess one of the things is, removing the things that are energy draining and energy sucking, or trying to avoid them as much as possible. Sometimes you don't identify them that well in advance, and you kind of end up in the middle of something like, oh, this is just taking so much energy. Yeah. And one of the other things is just and probably I should have emphasized this, is, finding your own enjoyment out of stuff, like the things that are fun. There's always, there are things that are grueling, but yeah, there's incredible things that are fun, and, you can do a lot when you just optimize for some of those things. So. It looks like, okay, one last final question from Anton. What do you think about the relationship between energy and money? I've worked on a lot of monetary systems. I worked on alternative currency systems even before Ethereum, digital stuff that was very successful in blockchain. And I think that money is kind of what we make it to be. It's a social contract in and of itself. And, when you have enough people that want to engage in a certain way, you can do it. And it takes a kind of critical mass. So in some ways, it's like a value accounting system. And it's a challenge to get a new monetary system out. But there are all kinds of interesting alternative things that are in that area, even these sort of reputational systems that exist in various, online sort of karma-based things. They are an equivalent of money in many ways. Like, you could go around, for instance, couch surfing. If you build up a lot of karma in that system back when it was thriving, you could easily go around the world and live for free in any major city because you had, good karma within that particular system. So I think that we're going to see a bunch more systems that evolve that are in that category. including some very robust ones. All right, thanks everyone for tuning in, and feel free to reach out to me. I think I'll just drop my email here, and